So here are the notes for 1.10, examples 3 and 4. So these are basically writing quadratic functions in standard form. So what we're going to do is we're going to be given points or a set of data, and we actually have to use our graphing calculator to find the quadratic functions in standard form. So type 1 is when we're giving the ordered pairs. So we're given 3 ordered pairs. Now notice for this example, we have to write the quadratic function in standard form. So let's go back and remember, what is standard form? Well, remember, standard form is y equals a times x squared plus bx plus c. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to use matrices to find our a, b, and c values to indicate what's our quadratic function that goes through these ordered pairs. Now, to do that, we're going to plug in each of these x and y values into our standard form. Okay, so here's our x and y. I'm going to use 1, 2 first. So you do have to use each of these points, okay? So we're going to plug 1 in for every place we see x, and then we'll plug 2 in for y. So here we have 2 equals a times 1 squared, and then plus b times 1, and then the plus c. Okay, so now we have to rewrite this. So we know 1 squared is 1. And don't forget the 2 over here, so we got to keep that. So we have 2 equals. So 1 squared is just 1. So a times 1 just gives us a. Then b times 1 just gives us b. And then we got plus c. Okay. Now we do the same thing for our 3, 4. So 3 is our x value, so we plug that into our standard form every single time we see x, and then the 4 will go into the y position. So here we have 4 equals a times 3 squared plus b times 3 plus c. Okay, so now we have to rewrite this. So 4, we just still have that. Now we do have to do 3 squared. That gives us 9. So we now have 9a. And then b times 3 gives us plus 3b. And then plus the c. And then lastly, we have 6, negative 8. So 6 is our x value. So we'll plug that every single time we see x into the standard form. And then negative 8 is our y, so we plug that into there. So we have negative 8 equals, and then we do a times 6, so we plug that into the x spot, and we square it, plus b times 6, and then we'll have the plus c at the end. So now we do have to evaluate. So here we still have negative 8. Now we do 6 squared, that gives us 36. So we have 36a. Then we have b times 6, so that gives us plus 6b. And then plus the c. Now, as I said before, we are going to use matrices to find our a, b, and c values. Okay? Now, remember when we do our matrices, we have our A matrix. The A matrix consists of all the coefficients. Remember, coefficients are numbers in front of our variables. So we're going to pick all the numbers that are in front of our A, B, and C variables. Then we have our variable matrix, which is x, and then we set it equal to our B matrix. That is basically considered using the constants, okay, or the y values here. So let's go ahead, we're going to create that. So I'm going to scroll down. Make sure if I am going too fast that you pause and then write everything down that you can. Okay. So I'll scroll here since that gives us enough room. So remember, A matrix, that is our coefficient. So all the values in front of our variables. So on our first one, we have 1, 1, and 1 because all those values in front of our A, B, and C are just 1. So remember, we go across here, so we have 1, 1, and 1. Now if we go to our second, our red equation here, the coefficients are 9, 3, and 1. So those are the numbers in front of our A, B, and C values. And then for our last equation, we have 36, 6, and 1. So those are the numbers in front of our A, B, and C values on our third equation. Then we multiply that by our variable and variable matrix. Now notice here we have A, B, and C. So that's what we're trying to find. So we have to use A, we got B, and we got C. So that's what we're trying to find here. Then we set it equal to our B matrix. And this just only consists of the Y values over here, okay? The constants. So we have 2, 4, and negative 8. So we have 2, 4, and negative 8. So basically, we are doing the equation, the matrix equation of AX equals B. Okay. Now remember, what we're trying to do is get the X matrix, our variable matrix, all by itself. To do that, we need to move the A matrix to the other side. And by doing that, we take the inverse of our A matrix. And then we multiply it by our B. So this is where you need to use your graphing calculator, because what we will have to do is plug in our A matrix and our B matrix into the graphing calculator. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Remember, going too fast, pause the video so you can get all this written down. Okay, so let's go ahead and plug this into our calculator. Now remember, to get to our matrices, you go to the blue button second, and then we press the X to the negative first. Remember, this is actually what we call the inverse button. So we call that. And you can see in the blue it says matrix, so that gets us to our matrices. Now I need to scroll over to edit because I do need to edit my matrices, and I go into A first. Now it's very important that you know the dimensions. So let's go back to our notes and see what the dimensions are. So we look, the dimensions go by rows and then columns. Rows are the horizontal, columns are the vertical. So we count, we have 1, 2, 3 rows, and then columns we have 1, 2, 3. So we would call this our dimension of matrix A 3 by 3, because we have 3 rows and 3 columns. So let's go ahead, we're going to change that onto our graphing calculator. So remember, to do this, we just press the number and then enter. So I do a 3 by 3. And now I'm going to plug in the values. So remember, we had 1, and then I press enter, 1, and 1. Every single time you plug in a value, press enter afterwards, and it'll move on to the next one. So then we have 9, 3, 1. So I press 9, enter, 3, and then 1. And then our last row, we had 36, 6, and 1. Now that I have edited my A matrix, I have to do the same for the B. So once again, to do that, we go to second and then the inverse key right here, okay? And it does say matrix above it, so that's the key that you need to press. So once again, I need to right arrow over to edit and then go down to B and press enter. Now let's go back to our notes to see what is the dimensions of our B matrix. So here we see we have 1, 2, 3 rows and just 1 column. So that means the dimensions of our matrix B is 3 by 1. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that into my graphing calculator. So I press 3, enter, and then 1, enter. And then here we are going to put 2, 4, and negative 8. So we do 2, 4, make sure you do the negative sign, and negative 8. Now I need to go back to my main screen. Remember, to ever do that, you press second in the mode button. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to my matrices, and so I can multiply them. So I press second, the inverse key, and then I press enter because I want my A matrix. Now remember, we're doing the inverse of A, so I press the inverse key. Now I'm going to multiply this by my B matrix. So I go to second, and then once again the inverse key. I scroll down to B and press enter. Now I have my inverse of A matrix multiplied by B. After this, I just press enter. And then I get my A, B, and C values. So in this case, we know that X equals, because that's our X, our variable matrix, is -1, 5, and -2. But remember, we're not just solving, but we're actually writing the quadratic function in standard form. So what we're going to do is for the A variable, we're going to plug in -1. For the B, we're going to substitute that with 5. And then for our C, we're going to substitute that with -2. So finally, how we write this quadratic function is as so. We have y equals, our A is -1, so we have -x squared. 5 is our B value, so we have plus 5x. And then -2 is our C value. So the quadratic function that goes through those 3 points that were given to us at the very beginning is y equals -x squared plus 5x minus 2. And this would be your final answer. So make sure once you get your A, B, and C values, you plug it back into the standard form to write that quadratic function. This would be your final answer here. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next example, example 4, or I guess it's example 3, type 2, where we are going to once again use our graphing calculators. So once again, we are going to write a quadratic function in standard form. But this time, we are actually going to use our regression. Now, you guys have already done in Algebra 1 how to find the linear regression. This time, we're going to do a quadratic regression. So that means we're going to figure out when we plug in these data points, what is the best fitting line or best fitting quadratic that goes with this data points. Okay, so it says the table shows the average sale price P of a house in the Suffolk County, Massachusetts, for various years T since 1988. Find the quadratic regression model for the data. So they kind of already tell you what we need to do, find the regression model. Now, once we find that, then we're going to do the second part. So we'll estimate the average sale price of a house in 2012 using the model. So let's look at our data points here. So we have T, which T is our time since 1988. So we have 0, 2, 4, 6, and 8, and 10. And then P, our price, which is thousands of dollars. Okay. So here, the top row kind of represents our X, while the bottom row represents our Y values. Okay. So for every X, we got a Y value. So this is how we're going to find our quadratic regression. So let's go back to our graphing calculators. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to actually press the stat key. So you see stat, S-T-A-T, okay, it's right near the alpha key. So we're going to press that. Now, what we're going to do is edit our stat list. So we press enter so we can edit. Now you're going to see we have L1, L2, L3, etc. Really, all we need is L1, which we call our list 1, and L2, list 2. Okay? Now, L1 always represents your X values, while L2 represents your Y's. So let's go back to the notes so we know what is our L1 and our L2. So remember X or T, okay? That's going to be our L1. While the sale price, okay, which is represented as P, but that is our Y values, that's L2. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to list 1, and we're going to put all these values in that list. So 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. Now notice we already have some values here. So this happens, all you have to do is I'm going to scroll over some in list 1. So I right click or right arrow, and I'm going to go up using my up arrow and highlight L1. To clear all these values, I'm going to press the clear button and enter. This allows me to clear all the values. Now, one thing is never ever press the delete. It actually gets rid of the L1, so we don't want to do that, because if that happens, you will have to reset your calculator. So just press the clear button. So now we are going to plug in the values 0, and when you plug in values, press enter afterwards. It puts it in your list. So we put 0, then 2, enter, 4, enter, 6, 8, and 10. Okay. Now that we got our L1 or list 1, we're now going to right arrow over to our list 2. And once again, as you can see, we have values that we don't want. So I'm going to go up, highlight list 2, and press the clear button, and then press enter. It gets rid of all those values. Okay, so remember our L2 is the sale prices. So we're going to plug in these values here that we see in the table. So we're going to plug in 165. Don't forget, press enter after each number you plug in. Then 154.5, press enter. Then 124.5, 115, 128, and 165. Now make sure the numbers in list 1, there should be the same amount as the numbers in list 2. So they end at the same spot, so we're good to go. Okay, so now we're going to find the linear regression. Now to do that, we have to go, quadratic regression. We're trying to find quadratic. So to do that, we're going to go back to stat, so press the stat key. Now we're going to go to calc, so right arrow over, and we're going to calculate the quadratic regression. Meaning we're going to go down to number 5 and go to quad reg. That just means find the quadratic regression. And we're going to press enter for that. Now you're going to see X list, right? That's our L1. The Y list is our L2. We have already established that because remember, when we go back to our table, we said the time, which is the X values, that was our list 1 or L1. And then our price was our Y value, so that was L2. So since that works, we're just going to down arrow all the way to calculate until it's highlighted. From here, what you're going to do is press enter. And now what you're going to see is they give you the A, B, and C values. So to write our quadratic regression in standard form, we're going to plug A into where we see A, the B value into B, and the C into the C value. Now let's just go ahead, let's round to 3 decimal places. Now usually they'll tell you where to round to. If not, you can just round to 1, 2, or 3 decimal places. It's really up to you. Okay, so we're going to plug all these values into our quadratic regression. So I'm going to scroll down so I have room to write this. So don't forget our standard form was y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, so our a value, right, we said that was 1.828 minus 19.553. So this is our B value. And remember, we got this from our graphing calculator. And then our C value, we have plus 172.732. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do, because I noticed I put Y and X, I know that's what I said where T is our X and the prices are Y, but we do have to use the variables they gave us. So I'm going to interchange my X with the T and the Y with the P. So I'm doing this correctly. So I'm just going to change those really quick. so that I'm using the correct variables that they've given us. So I'm going to replace x with t and then the y with p, just because those are the variables they've used in the problems. Okay. Okay, so our quadratic regression is p equals 1.828t squared minus 19.553t plus 172.732. And remember, I just rounded to the thirds, even though they didn't tell us to do that. I just wanted to be kind of as close as possible. Okay, so that was our first part, writing the regression. So I'm going to circle that so we know that is our answer. Now, the second part to this problem, it asks, then estimate the average sale price of a house in 2012 using the model. So remember, P represents price. That's what we're trying to solve for. So we need to plug in a value for T. Now, to figure out what this T value is, we can't use 2012, okay? That would give us some outrageous price. What we have to do so we can get our T values is we're going to take 2012 and subtract it from 1988. Because remember, T represents the years since 1988. So we're going to see how far is 2012 from 1988. So we have 2012 minus 1998. And you can use your calculator if you want to calculate this. So when we do, we should get about 24 years. Okay? And that's going to be our T value. So to get our final answer, we're going to plug 24 in every single place we see T. So we have P equals 1.828 times 24 squared minus 19.553 times 24, and then plus 1.7, it should be 172 point, there we go. So 172.732, okay? So now what we're going to do is we're going to plug this into our calculator. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll back over to that. Remember, if I am going too fast, pause the video so you can get this all written down. So remember we have, so I'm going to put 1.828 times, now we do 24 squared, so 24 squared, then minus 19.553. We multiply that by 24. And then we add 172.732. And then we press enter. So we get 756.388. So let's go ahead and write that down. Okay, I'm going to go down a little bit. There we go. So we get our price as 756.388. Now, it wouldn't really make sense if they only had to pay $756, right? Because we're trying to figure out how much does a house cost. So remember, this says average sale price, thousands of dollars. Remember, thousands, to get that, we move the decimal over 3 places. So that is one of the reasons why we rounded to 3 places, so we can get the thousands, okay? So really our final answer, because we have to write this price in thousands of dollars, if we move our decimal over 3 places, we're going to get our final answer. So really, the average cost or sale price of a house in 2012 was $756,388. So that would be our final answer. So we do have to write our answers in that thousands of dollars to represent that. Okay, so that's how you figure out quadratic regressions, and then how to use a quadratic regression to find your final answer. So if you have any questions, make sure you come in before or after school or email me. And remember, if you forget how to do this, always refer back to this video.